Just a few technical reminding notes before we get started. If you experience any issues with your audio or video during the conference, just refresh your browser and that should take care of everything. If you have any questions for our speakers or panel members, please do feel free to post your questions on the video wall, which is on the right-hand side of your screen. We will share with our speaker at the end of the session, and they will reply to you through the video wall or through the email afterwards. If you'd like to connect with our speakers, please move to the home lobby page. You can find the speaker by typing their names under Networking tab on the right-hand corner of your screen. We welcome all of our audience to interact with each other through our networking features. And also, please feel free to tag us on our social media handles with the hashtag AIMDigital. We are now moving to an IPA focus session titled Lead Generation During COVID-19. COVID-19 has had a significant impact on business, travel, and communication. In the pre-COVID times, face-to-face interaction, business card exchange was a common way of communication and facilitating lead generation. Now we are looking into digital interaction, therefore leading to a push to new forms of lead generation. In this session, we will have IPAs discuss how their model of lead generation has changed. How have they adapted themselves to these changes and what is in store for IPAs? I would like to now invite Mr. David East to lead the session.
Okay, well, firstly, my thanks to the organizers for putting on this important webinar. Welcome to the AIM meeting digital edition. This is an IPA session that's looking at lead generation during COVID-19. So really the aim of this is to better understand what some of the challenges that IPAs are currently facing and maybe to touch upon what the future may hold as well. We'll be hearing from a number of senior IPA representatives from around the world, as well as from an experienced lead generation consultant. We are joined today by His Excellency Dr. Tariq bin Hendi, the Director General of Abu Dhabi Investment Office, George Campanellis, the Chief Executive Officer of Invest Cyprus, Ziva Iga, the Chief Executive of Invest in Israel and Industrial Cooperation Authority, Mr. Yofi Grant, the Chief Executive Officer of the Ghana Investment Promotion Center, Marina Yipifanseva, the Deputy Chief Executive of Tatarstan Investment Development Agency, Mr. Steve Just, the President and CEO of Gazelle.ai, and Joe Hepworth, the Director of Middle East Operations for IDA Ireland. So first of all, welcome everybody.
Thank you.
Let's begin this session by exploring what the data is telling us. So looking at the year to the end of September, Greenfield project numbers are down 51% year on year globally, and capital expenditure down roughly 50%, according to data from Bureau van Dijk. UNCTAD forecasted at the beginning or earlier this year a decline of around 40% for this year, an additional 5% in 2021. So I think it's probably looking pretty realistic in terms of that forecast, pretty accurate. Looking at the key source markets for FDI, the US is down 53% in terms of project numbers, Germany down 41%, with CapEx down 61%. China, we're seeing a decrease of roughly 69%, and UK down 53% year on year. So clearly there's going to be less projects, which means there's going to be increased competition for that FDI. So looking ahead, again, we have this issue right now within COVID-19, particularly with travel restrictions, company policies, amongst other deterrents, which are going to make it more and more difficult for organizations like the IPAs to go out there and meet with potential investors. In fact, one of my colleagues recently commented that he was talking to a large financial institution and they were advised that they will not be receiving guests until the middle of 2021. So again, it goes to highlight some of the challenges there. Trade shows, again, which have been traditional hunting grounds for leads, cease to exist in person. From speaking with my peers, there is a feeling that digital equivalents don't work as well for lead generation because the networking aspect is a more like randomized speed dating. You know, you don't necessarily have that one-to-one time to really get to know the investor and so on. In addition, I think there's also questions regarding the security, right? So these platforms in terms of privacy, and I think that's something else that needs to be maybe addressed going forward. It's also increasingly evident that we are seeing a paradigm shift in the field of globalization as we begin seeing more regionalization of projects, Asia for Asia, Africa for Africa, Americas for Americas, etc. So this potentially should provide more opportunities for IPAs. We're also seeing that manufacturing companies in industries hardest hit by this pandemic will be preoccupied with shoring up their finances, reducing capex, and subsequently they'll start contemplating restructuring their supply chains to increase resiliency. We are also seeing increased screening by FDI government, increased screening of FDI by governments, and a determination to protect strategic assets and companies most impacted by the pandemic. And finally, there's an ongoing trade war. So it's not an easy time right now to be operating in this industry. Finally, we've seen that there's been a number of FDI projects that have been going ahead. That's great to hear, but these are much slower to actually realize. And mostly the ones that have happened this year were ones that were already going to happen. So the main challenge with lead generation will be the identifying of new prospects, understanding which markets and industries to target and when. So let's open this up to our expert panelists. Joe, if I may, should IPAs be actively engaging in lead generation at the moment?
Thank you, David. Yes, we should, and I'd be interested to hear what my colleagues on the panel say about that. But I think it needs to be done in a sensible and, dare I say, sympathetic manner. You know, we've heard stories of other jurisdictions sort of going in like a bull in a china shop to this and not really understanding that. I think firstly it's around getting your targeting right, but then when you're talking to a company, you know, they might not be thinking about expanding this year or next year. They might be just worried about the sort of honouring the month's payroll. And so you really need to do your research and get to know the company, and then have your pitch even more tailored and sort of contextualized for the current environment. But I think it's important to stay out there, because if you don't stay out there, you'll disappear. Like you said, it's a very, very competitive market. B, whilst I think maybe there's fewer decisions being made right now at the moment and in the last 6 months, one of the things we found is that everything's on the table because of the seismic nature of the what we've been going through. And again, you've touched on some of these things around, supply chain relocation and that whole sort of, I think, knock it down and build it up again, which some companies, some industries are looking at. So you really need to be talking to investors now to make yourself known, to make your value proposition clear. So when maybe when the cycle does turn a bit, or when they're ready to do so, they've had that conversation, they've had the information, they understand the offer, they know the incentives, the value from Ireland or from Israel or from Ghana or wherever it is. So then they're able to act at the time they're at. And I think if you withdraw from the market now and say, well, nobody's making decisions, let's not do that, you're probably missing a trick.
Sure. I mean, Yofi, from your perspective, looking at Ghana, I mean, what have you been seeing? What are the kind of key differences you've noticed over the past 6 to 8 months or so?
Well, it's been pretty interesting because with the advent of the pandemic, we really suspected, especially on the reports of UNCTAD and all that we're going to see a sudden shrinkage in FDI coming to Ghana and perhaps to the region. But first of all, I do agree with David. David made some very interesting points, relocation of supply chains, et cetera, in which case I think Africa will still stand out as the most attractive at this point. But you must realize that life will go on. And there's been a lot of disruption in production, a lot of disruption in the financial sector, and then a lot of disruption in the value chain. These need to be reestablished whenever COVID goes away. That's if it goes away or we find a way to deal with it. And the world will still require raw materials, most of which you'd find in Africa. The world will still need to reestablish the manufacturing capacity to restart the economies, etc. So investments would have to come somehow. And I believe that, yes, people will be a bit more, picky about what they invest in. But I believe that a lot of the investments will go to areas that really have a wider regional reach than just a small local country reach. But interestingly, in the first quarter of this year, and I can give you some numbers where we attracted FDI of $180 million, which was 400% more than we did same period last year. So it was pretty encouraging, and we're looking to, see a sudden surge in FDI in Ghana. And then COVID hit. So in the first few months of the COVID pandemic, which I would say maybe March, April through to May, we did have a very dry season talking to investors because everybody was trying to save their lives, first of all. So they were not talking about investment. But by the end of June, there was a sudden turnaround. And we saw a significant rise in new investments, including some that were already in the pipeline that we're talking about. So the first half of this year, total FDI to Ghana was in the region of $785 million, whilst we expected that it was going to be a figure much, much, much less than that. And I asked myself why. First of all, there are still people, investors in the market looking at resources. So some of the major investments that we've seen during this period have been in the oil and gas sector. And the next are in manufacturing manufacturing and then in agriculture. These are all economies that the world would definitely need some energizing post-COVID. And therefore, for me, as much as it's been a real downturn, it's also been a great opportunity for countries with the resources and countries with the land to grow food going forward. And so we have not seen what we expected, that
Sure.
there will be a total depreciation of the numbers.
Okay, interesting. Steve, let's just give a private sector perspective on this. So obviously you and your team, you're out there, you're regularly engaging with potential investors. Why is it important that IPAs continue to do this? I mean, obviously, there was a World Bank and WIPA report that said about 24% of an IPA's budget was allocated towards lead generation. Even more so than it was for aftercare and business retention. So in your opinion, Carl, why is it important that IPAs continue doing this?
So, David, that's a great question, and we've been recommending to our clients that they continue their lead generation efforts for a number of reasons. I think, even when there's a certain amount of bad luck, you need to kind of look for the good luck in the bad luck. And I think when we try and look at some of the positives in the current environment, I think what we're seeing is that there are definitely some IPAs who have taken a step back and who have decided to postpone or wait to see how COVID plays out before becoming more aggressive in their lead generation and investment prospecting strategies and tactics. And I think that what this has done is it's opened up the arena for IPAs who are more aggressive to have their message be heard better. There's less noise out there. The ocean is a bit less red, perhaps a bit more blue ocean sort of thinking, whereas there's not as much competition. I think also, given the fact that a lot of companies have decided to push their decision-making process back a few months, it actually represents an opportunity. And the opportunity is that companies can now look at some regions and some areas where perhaps they hadn't considered. So if you are being more aggressive and you are still out there promoting yourself, then perhaps a company will give you a second look, whereas perhaps, in the first go round of the site selection process, you may not have been considered. But what I also tell our clients is that whether it's in 6 months or in 8 months or in 10 months, what may have you, when the world starts to look a bit more like what we were used to 6 months ago, you don't want to find yourself as one of the IPAs that have no companies top of funnel or mid funnel, and all of your competitors are out in the market trying to beat down the same doors as you are. So it's just very important to maintain a level of consistency and ongoing effort in your lead generation efforts. I think even now, when there may be fewer projects or projects may be pushed out, such that your funnel is in a healthy place, such that when travel is a lot easier, that you can travel with purpose and meet with companies that you've already started to build a relationship with.
Sure. No, I think you made some really valuable points there. Dr. Tariq, I want to just quickly turn this over to you. So, we've heard that there's been some postponements and so on. What's been the impact in terms of generating new leads as opposed to those already in the pipeline, particularly from an Abu Dhabi perspective?
Yeah, David, look, it's a great question. I have to say, I don't think I've been as busy in my entire career as I have been in the last 6 to 9 months as it relates to both lead generation as well as the conversion of that into companies and boots on the ground. And I say that very humbly as it relates to what we've been able to accomplish, considering the circumstances all of us have been through recently. I think for us, what we've seen, where we've seen companies be very receptive to the messaging is where we're able to then deliver on that messaging. So there's a component here of how responsive we are, how we can adapt our policies, our financial instruments, our non-financial support, how it is that we can use this collaborative approach that we have and cater to this diversification requirement that many institutions are looking to accomplish, right? We've had, and many of our conversations have been around, well, we were very committed to one jurisdiction and we had 80 to 90% of all of our production in that one jurisdiction. And now we realize that if something happens in that particular country and we don't have a diversified, set of businesses around the world, we may be impacted quite substantially. So many of our discussions are revolve around our hard infrastructure that we have, the logistical component that we've built out in the UAE, so on and so forth. So I have to say, it's been more challenging to relocate people than it has been to convince companies to reassign part of their supply chain and their production to different jurisdictions. And with them adopting technology, which is what we fund, right? We fund a lot of those technological advances and innovation. It makes it simpler for them to be able to relocate components of their business to Abu Dhabi without necessarily having to move the people immediately as well. And I think this has been something that's been quite revelatory over the last 6 to 9 months in terms of how adaptive policymakers have been, but also how quickly the best companies are realizing they've got to change their business models to be able to withstand the pressure that they've been under. So I won't belabor the point, but it really has been quite a busy period. And obviously with the Abraham Accords as well, it's only advanced how busy we've been recently. And, Jiva can attest to that in terms of the discussions we've had. And also thank you for having me on this panel. I'm really appreciative of the fact that I can share this stage with a lot of very successful people doing things for some phenomenal countries. So thank you. Thank
you, Tariq. Dr. Tariq, thank you for those comments. I think you've obviously just raised something there in terms of the recent accord with Israel. So I'm going to turn this over, pass the same question on to Ziva, see whether this again is something that you've seen as well. Have you never been so busy?
Yeah, actually we are very busy those days, and Dr. Tariq makes me more busy. Because of this amazing collaboration that we just started. But I would like to mention, because you just asked what is going on right now. So I think that when it all started, we realized that something big is going on. And we cannot sit on the fence and do whatever we did like before. We have to adapt our policy, our work methods. So what we did in Israel is that we shifted 180 degrees, the focus of investing in Israel. We shifted to a crisis management mode. We define a different strategic point, and we just put aside all our work plan, all our work methods, and we based on doing assessments, doing response and collaboration. What we did, first of all, we approached our local companies, as Dr. Tariq said. We approach our clients in Israel and we ask them what their needs, what are the challenges that you are facing. We solved and we put a lot of effort in order to solve all the specific cases and problems, of course, using our tools in the Ministry of Economy and our colleagues in the government. And regarding collaboration, which is so obviously because it's our base value anyway and naturally, this time we needed to enhance the collaboration. We understood that we need to do that because the COVID-19 is actually bring the need to bring a let's say holistic solution. So that we did in general, but what we did know, like everyone, is that this COVID-19 impact is going to last for the, let's say, next 2 or 3 years. Okay, it's not going to pass that quickly, unfortunately. So it's going to limit, as you just said before, the conferences, the delegation, all the events. So of course we moved like everyone to the digital platform. And even though I'm a person of people and I don't like those Zoom, I think it has a lot of advantage because like in such a short time, everyone is so accessible and you can do so many meetings. You don't have to fly and here, look at us doing this panel in no time, which is a great advantage to us as the foreign direct office or unit. But if we're talking about the lead generation that you just mentioned, so what I do leading this unit is, first of all, I put a focus on my multinational companies in order not overcome their challenges, but also help them to increase and grow in Israel. Okay, it can be by M&A, it can be organically, I don't know. But first of all, take care of it. And second, what we did is that we shift our marketing efforts from, let's say, I called it as the broadcast strategy to a targeting strategy, pointing a specific company that can be engaged with the, let's say, the main sectors that now is on the main stage with these medical devices, agri-tech, food tech, clean tech. And by doing that, by the way, we put less effort on going out and more efforts on collaboration and make it much more successful and flourish our work. But you just asked before, and it's so right. You asked, is it really need to do foreign direct investment right now? Yes, this is the time, because COVID-19 teaches us all that all of us need to be innovative, organization, industries, companies. You cannot be not innovative in order to pass crisis. You need to be robust so you can adapt technologies to different end use. So only this time we get so many calls from around the world from companies asking for technologies, asking to be part of our ecosystem, because you need as much as more technologies in order to face those kind of crises like the COVID-19 and many others.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. I mean, I think you touched on some really key messages there, which was first and foremost about the importance of empowering and supporting your existing investor base. George, I want to quickly turn it over to you. From a Cypriot perspective, how have you found this? I mean, what's been the impact in terms of generating new leads? I know Brexit is obviously a big opportunity for Cyprus, okay? Well, how have you found the first 8 months of this year? Has it been a challenge from a lead generation perspective for you? Or what's been the focus of the agency?
Thank you. First of all, let me congratulate you for this very interesting panel. Thank you for inviting me. From our perspective, being a European country, a member of the European Union, and also having the same legal systems like UK, because it is based on the British common law principles. We have been in a position to attract investment from UK because of Brexit. That's true. And of course, this process have been affected negatively because of the development. Our traditional model has been basically based on traveling, I would say, more than and less in digital. Also, the fact that we are talking about a clearly service-based economy. 85% of our economy is reliant on services. We have a very strong private sector, but we work together. So it's not everything is based on our efforts, but our joint efforts. And the fact that the traveling has been stalled and paused has put a strong burden in our endeavors. I would say that I would agree with Ziva. At the first, it was a crisis management situation. We as well have given all our emphasis into the facilitation and aftercare part of our role, because here in Cyprus, we already have a number of foreign investors, and we wanted them to be, the level of satisfaction to be high of the response of the government to this crisis. And as Ziva said, we still working and assisting them in scaling up their activities. Because what was our effort, the government, the people, and us at Invest Cyprus, was the the positive response to COVID. We invested heavily on that. We managed to flatten the curve very early. We are proud to have the lowest positive case per test in Europe. And we are still standing strong. And we've seen this coming up, reflecting to us, I would say, from July onwards, also with the opening of the airports. It has been praised by the international community. And since then, I would say that we received more inquiries, basically for companies to relocate, for taking advantage of the EU passporting in the finance industry, specifically coming from Brexit. And also, both the government and us as an organization, it work towards expediting reforms and structural changes. So yes, the fact, I'll come back to your question, the fact that we have been based heavily on the traveling and physical meetings and the lead generation, obviously there has been a need to change and use of digital ways of doing that. And we already did a number of such steps towards this direction. But I would say that it's challenging because it all depends on the length of this crisis, on how the situation will go. Personally, I don't see all the IPAs moving from day one to the next day to move from physical to digital everything. I guess that each country has its own characteristics, its own in regards to the economic sectors that they promote, in regards to the whether the private sector joins the promotional activities or not, and what are the strengths of the private sector as well. And obviously, based on the budget that the government allocates to them, they should make the best use of it.
Absolutely. George, I'll be booking my holiday out to Cyprus soon, given your low COVID rates. Marina, I'm going to turn this over to you now. Thank you for being so patient. Tatarstan, obviously, I think that as I understand, there was a lot of manufacturing there, there was a lot of automotive industry and so on. Talk to us a bit more about some of the challenges that you've had at Tatarstan, and more importantly, Carl, what's been the impact for you in terms of generating new leads?
Thank you so much, David. I'm happy, first of all, that annual investment meeting is on, even online, because this site has always been for us a good lead generation platform, as we took part in it annually. And of course, the figures now are not showing much decline or any decline, let's say. I think we will see it later, because the general period of investment project implementation is like 3 to 5 years. So this year we are having all our projects finishing their, let's say, construction, or like go into the operation work. We will see it later, when we don't see that many companies which has started this year, which founded their companies, and so on. So it will be next year's. Answering your questions on figures. Of course, we are happy to be a subnational, operating successfully in our country. Like, we are the only ones here like this, and we can say that we are working at our best, and we haven't stopped for a day. So we didn't close our agency, we were online, and immediately as there was a lockdown, we went online. And this place you see is a studio that we've built inside our agency to start different sessions from here, webinars and so on. So we went online immediately, and all the others, the investors, the territories, because we are not working with investors only. We are working with governments, we are working with diplomats, some other bodies. So we are working with everybody because I can say that the sport of entering the investors to the territory can be different. It's not only the agency. They can call the municipality, they can call their friends, they can call the free economic zone, like any spot. And we are here to answer questions they have and to promote ourselves online. So this, like last month, is in September, the delegations started to come again, even the foreign ones, but we understand that the borders are still closed. And in this period, during April to September, what we did was changing the industries, how Israel said, yes. So we were watching who is on the rise. For example, it was e-commerce. So it was not only those who were working on survival of us, like the producers of masks, of special medical devices, and so on. Other industries boosted, like retailing companies who were building their warehouses very fast because they needed to spread their products. So we were working with them. We were working with those who needed our support and like administrative support at this point, not forgetting, of course, about our other investors who were working on their projects. And the last thing that was interesting during this period, that the like at this point you need to think on how to change, like a pivot that's usually used in venture capitals, like how to change it to keep it going. And this year we used more the instrument of technical, let's say, directorship for those companies that can't come but are willing to open their enterprises already. So we offered our people to work as directors and founders in their companies, and we are waiting for them later when the boundaries are open, and we can start into foreign direct investments. You see, the last point I would like to say is that we have KPIs put to us by government. So the first one is FDIs, of course, but the second one is the private investments into fixed assets. So at this time we have like less in the FDIs, more in capital investments. Yes, and so we are not like changing our directions. We are still working on FDIs, but we are now like giving more attention to our
Prioritizing
local
other areas.
investors.
Yeah.
Yes, to our to investors who are here speaking on reinvestment with them. So it's not that we are changing dramatically. We are just having more time.
Adapting. Yeah.
To adapt and to do what we were not doing before, like this. Thank
Excellent.
you.
Marina, thank you very much for that. I think that was very insightful in terms of the way that the organization's pivoted slightly and how it's put greater emphasis in different parts. I think, Ziva, you two made some very interesting observations there regarding reprioritization. I'm going to come back and touch on that in a second. But Steve, if I may, obviously you're working with a lot of investors, your team, you're hearing quite often, what are the signals? Right? What type of signals should IPAs be looking for when they're looking to kind of develop their target lists? What are the kind of signals that stand out?
Well, from our perspective, David, when we're building lists of targeted companies in different geographic regions, we're always looking for cluster growth hotspots. That's sort of where we start. So we're looking for regions around the world where companies are showing encouraging higher than average sales growth. This tells us that the companies are in growth mode. But sometimes this isn't really enough to tell us if these companies are willing to expand internationally or to relocate, et cetera. So what we also look for are areas around the world where there's significant growth in salaries. So we layer the cluster growth hotspots with salary data, compensation data, and we look for areas that have both high sales growth and higher than average compensation growth. And what that tells us is that companies in those areas are very likely having trouble recruiting people. As we know, workforce works in a very similar way as the economy in general, based on supply and demand. If there is not enough supply to meet demand, prices go up, and in the world of workforce, salaries go up. So companies that are growing in these regions that can't find people or paying more money from a salary perspective are typically suffering from eroding margins. They're obviously not able to fulfill a lot of the open spaces or open jobs that they're looking to fill. And so they'll start looking to other jurisdictions where there might be an abundance in this workforce. So these are some of the most typical signals that we're looking for. We use over 900 signals in our AI. One of the more interesting signals that we've come across specifically related to technology companies, as you might imagine, are companies who've received B and C, D level VC funding. This is also proven to be a pretty important signal for growth companies in technology. So if we can find these companies, if they have a reasonable balance sheet and their BC series of funding is significant, then these companies are typically looking to internationalize. They're looking to market their products in new areas, and typically that could entail, to start with, a modest office overseas. But as we know, these modest offices can quickly turn into technical assistance centers, R&D centers, and before you know it, small investments of 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 people can balloon to 100 or 200 people. I often tell my clients, it's not so much a question of building your targets based on large companies today. A lot of clients get very seduced by the notion of building targeted lists with very large multinationals to try and attract companies with balance sheets permitting very large transformational type projects. These are wonderful and everybody wants these, but they're quite few and far between. The growth really happens in growth companies and companies that are called gazelles, where we see a combined annual growth rate of 20% a year over 5 years. These companies represent 70% of net new jobs in any economy. They also represent a lion's share of R&D expense, capital expenditure. So really it's a question of diversification. Yes, let's call on and try and solicit those big multinationals, but let's also look for growth companies and fast growth companies. And really that's our mantra at ROI, is to use diversification by way of the traditional big guys, and then also some of the fast growth businesses.
Excellent. No, thank you for that. I think that's a really good couple of points there. I mean, particularly Dr. Tariq, it talks to some of the points you were making there in terms of your agency and supporting and local small businesses and so on. Likewise, I think, Ziva, you're very fortunate with Israel. Incredible talent over there in terms of small companies, particularly around AI and so on, that are receiving this funding. So again, for those who are looking, this is a good opportunity to maybe partner with Ziva and look for some opportunities there to explore. Joe, from an IDA perspective, I mean, obviously IDA is regarded widely as a best practice IPA to a certain extent. How do you guys go about? I mean, we heard what Steve said there in terms of some of the key indicators that they will typically look at. Is a lot of that common to what you're doing at the IDA in terms of how you build up your target lists? And then can you also touch upon some of the key messages that you put out to investors?
Yeah, and maybe taking your second point first there in terms of the messaging, I think that the important thing that we've really adhered to over the last 6 months is not to try and get too funky, and what worked before still works now. Now for Ireland, that's the regulatory, the business, the tax, the legal landscape. Particularly at the moment, that's an important one with Brexit, as George mentioned, being common law, English language, a committed member of the EU. It's around skills and talent availability, and that's something that Ireland over the last 15, 20 years has spent a huge amount of investment on, to have excellent graduates in relevant and future-facing industries around technology. So it's around making sure those messages still get through, because they're still very relevant despite the sort of the crazy world that we're in now. Whilst I think, like everyone else, things have changed and all the rest of it, those core messages remain as current now as they did before. In terms of targeting, I mean, our key metric, and I think somebody else mentioned KPIs, I think it might have been Marina, around we're all targeted on winning FDI. We're targeted on winning FDI, but ultimately our job is to provide jobs for the people of Ireland. And that is even more fundamental now than it was 6 months ago, given that, you know, that employment in a lot of sectors is dropping, and in some cases is in serious distress. So our role as an IPA becomes even more fundamental to the national purpose, because we're having, you know, it was important before, but now it's even more important. So we have looked towards some of the gazelles and the unicorns, for example, and that's important. And we've got a very strong track record in, you know, I don't know what I guess the, you know, the FANGs, if you like, you know, I think they're all present in Ireland. But ultimately, you know, if we're to spend taxpayers' money on what we do, having a clear view on job creation over the next 1, 3, 5 years is fundamental to what we do. And I think like Stephen said, we've got many cases where a sales office developed into a regional office, developed into a regional hub and service center with hundreds of employees. And I think back to the previous comments as well around doubling down on your existing clients. We've seen that during the crisis, where we've had existing big tech companies from America and Europe and China wanting to put more resource and spend more and hire more in Ireland.
Sure. Okay, interesting. Ziva, I want to come back to you very quickly on something you mentioned about reprioritizing industries. Okay, so you said, okay, we had to do a pivot and we looked at this, and this touches upon what Joe was just talking about there a little bit as well, in terms of creating jobs for the people. Okay, now we know that governments want to become more resilient. You said you pivoted into certain high growth areas. How are you identifying those growth sectors?
Oh, okay, that's a quite easy question. We are in IPA in Israel, Invest in Israel, is a part of a large ecosystem. Okay, we are working with academia, with ministries, Ministry of Health. We are working with DDR&D. We are working with startup, with industries. So we are part of all of it. Now, we joined lately what we call the task force. Israel established a task force with all the brains, all the talent, all the ministries that can actually identify technologies for solutions for medical equipment, and we share it with the world. By the way, we did that on top of our job. We select solutions for medical equipment to Israel, and also share it with other countries like companies and technologies and stuff like that. So we are part of the ecosystem, and I think that we did that by doing the magic word that I said before, and Dr. Tariq said it also, the collaboration. I think that collaboration, those time, is the magic word, even though it looks like, and you said before, that IPAs are a rival, okay, competing FDIs because they are so little. I think it's the opposite way. I think that collaboration between IPA is a significant contribution to each of the nations, because we can share know-how, we can share leads, we can share, let's say, potential investor. If I have a company that wants to invest out of Israel, why won't I share it with Abu Dhabi? If he has, for example, a kind of a lead or technology he needs, why won't I help him from my ecosystem? I mean, I think that this collaboration, and I would like to thank Dr. Tariq again for giving me a call. I mean, the ADIO gave us a call as soon as the agreement has been signed for the collaboration and dialogue, and we put all our egos aside and start working together. Now, I think that because Israel consider, and you know it already, as a kind of a startup nation. Okay? We have a lot of startups, a lot of talent. We put a lot of effort as a government in order to share the risk with the market, in order to create new ideas. Now, this time frame, we'll do that the same. We created new programs for our industries in order to get solutions in R&D and in production. Now, you said at the beginning something which looks like there is a competition between local market and foreign direct investment. I don't think it's a competition. And I totally agree with Joe that just said before that the global work is going like from global perspective to local perspective. Okay, everyone is looking for the present, how we can strengthen our industry, how can we bring more jobs, because everyone was hurted this time of fear. And by the way, I think this started not only when COVID-19 started, it started like 2 years ago, thinking about our local place. But you can do that with foreign direct investment, as Joe just said, because we can leverage and expand our local clients from foreign countries to invest more and more in our industry. This is first. And second, I think that this time when everyone needs technology, when everyone needs to adapt their products to be more, let's say, to compete, to continue and lead the market. Because let's take, for example, 3D printers, okay? There is a company in Israel that does 3D printing for metal, okay? Now they can do it for masks. I mean, there is all about the technology. The end use can be changed. Now, if you understand that, so you change the whole business to be more robust. So we open instead of what other countries are doing. We open our hands and our gates to more and more, because we believe that this collaboration between nations and between companies, this is the best solution to defeat any crisis. And particularly COVID-19 regarding all it comes, because think about it, COVID-19 brings up problems as health, food, agriculture, water. This is the main sector of life. So getting together, bring together ideas, solutions, joint venture can do much better to all of us. And I think that I'm giving this a call because I have my friends here from other IPAs. And I really think that together we can gain. It's a win-win situation. It's an amazing synergy that is good for all of us.
No, fantastic, Ziva. I think you're touching on something there. I think it's really important, this whole concept of collaboration. I mean, if I go back to 2004, I think it was Scotland, Massachusetts, and Singapore had a life sciences agreement whereby companies from Scotland were going to Massachusetts, vice versa, and they were encouraging that. And I think that's a good thing. You also touched very briefly there on agriculture. So, Yofi, I want to open this up to you. I know that there's been some reprioritization with the Ghanaian Investment Promotion Center. Can you just give us a little bit more insight on that?
So one of the things that COVID-19 taught us was that we had deficits in certain aspects of the economy, for example, in the health sector and the food value chain. And so immediately we reprioritized to say, okay, so since there was a disruption in the global supply chain as well, how do we facilitate investment in some of these areas that to ensure that we do not have a severe deficit that further becomes a problem with managing this COVID-19. So we actually did reach out, and we found that there were quite a number of investors who were looking in the food space in agriculture, and also looking at the health sector in producing PPE that were required everywhere. But even more so, we got a lot of traction from investors who were looking at regional plays. So, okay, if I want to invest into Ghana, how does it affect the market in West Africa? And then how do I position myself, taking cognizance of the fact that you have a continental free trade area, which will be the world's biggest tariff-free trade zone since the WTO. So we saw quite a bit of that, and agro-processing has become one of the leading attractions in FDI, but also the fact that manufacturing, especially for little medical implements and medical requirements, became quite a priority then. But of course, just like Tarek said, and just like Joe said, one of the key priorities for the government in play is jobs. So you want also to see investors who facilitate job creation. But I'll tell you what my real realization has also come, that many of the investors are looking at investors that have a green impact, that have a significant impact.
Sustainable investment.
Sustainable development investment. But not only just sustainable development goals, but sustainable investments. so that, once you go into a certain area, you can sustain that investment. And so a lot of the work that we've been doing with WTO and WEF, especially for African IPAs, is how we can have a better investment facilitation platform that actually targets sustainable investment in SDGs.
Okay, interesting. No, thank you very much for that. I'm going to slightly change now away from the direction we've been talking about so far, because I want to look a bit more in terms of digital, okay, and the use of digital technology now going forward. Marina, you touched upon some of this when you were talking earlier in terms of some of the stuff that you've done within Tatarstan to engage with investors and so on and keep that profile up. Can you perhaps give us a bit more understanding of whether these new digital or virtual promotion strategies have been successful in helping you generate leads?
Actually, I came to this agency from commercial sector and work here for 5 years, and only this year we implemented CRM here. So it took some time to convince governmental people and to get this, I call it the amount of thinkers alike, like those who are too digital. Like last year, we had a change in our Ministry of Information and Communication. It changed into the Digital Government Development Ministry. They gave us all the CDTOs, this Chief Digital Transformation Officer lectures. And now we are all changing into digital government, which is heading to the technology of being like invisible government. So we are working now on all spheres of life so that they would become digital and seamless for our people, for investors, for anyone. So we started with making a CRM on foreign leads, like external leads. So we did it this year. Like some who are working on this like for decades, like I can guess Mida, for example, from Malaysian agency. Maybe it's not something new, but we are changing to it and changing very fast. And our main mission is to convince, to advocate this practice to everyone working in this process, to be open, to give the contacts, because like managers are changing, there is always a rotation inside government, like ministers are changing their chairs, people going, people coming. So not to waste a single lead is our strategy now. You wanted to ask something?
Yeah, no. I was just saying, but in terms of, are you undertaking, you said about webinars and so on. Have these been effective in terms of generating leads for you?
Let's turn to it. So we did a lot of webinars and on different topics. For example, we were making interviews with the ambassadors of different countries in Russian Federation. And because of this high status, they were watched. So there were a lot of participants in these webinars. And as we streamed them from our investment portal, it gained a lot of visitors like this. So also we had some webinars for entrepreneurs who were in a very hard situation during the lockdown times. So it all gave us new leads, which we are working on at this point. And besides that, speaking of studio, we made an online forum which lasted 12 days. 12 days, we were like teaching everyone what is investments, who are the people working in it, how it works in different, let's say, industries. And we had this chat with people. So it wasn't one session streaming through YouTube. So we did, are you sitting? 646 sessions
Wow,
during
that's a
this
lot of
period.
sessions.
This is a lot of sessions, and on each aspect our territory is doing. And the people were watching, they were asking questions. So this mainly was done for people so
Good.
that they would understand what's going on. This is also very important in our work.
Fantastic. Marina, well, you must be exhausted from all these Zoom and webinars and so on. Joe,
No,
I think
it's okay.
Okay, Joe, you would, I know that IDA have done some digital marketing and so on. Can you just touch upon some of the kind of stuff that you guys have been up to?
Yeah, I think the main thing here is that a key part of our investment attraction process is having itineraries where we invite the potential investor to Ireland, and depending on where they've come from, 3, 4, 5 days, meeting supply chain, regulator, peers, the whole network and industry, to really sort of get a, from the horse's mouth, an understanding of what it's like, and their war stories. Now, that's obviously just been off the table for 6 months. So we've gone to digital itineraries, which is suboptimal. I mean, I can't deny. I mean, I think we all sort of have, the sort of the tyranny of Teams and Zoom fatigue and all the rest of it. But it's how we're all working now, and in some cases, it's actually there is an improvement, because if you've got the legal, if you're with a lawyer, they can have the company secretary or the legal guy in the room. If it's about finance, they can. So in a way, it allows for a bit more participation from the prospective investor. But I think ultimately, we're in a contact sport here. People want to come and see it, and particularly if they're investing in something around manufacturing or pharmaceuticals, where the location is so important, where they really need to actually see the facility and understand, things like access and all of that sort of thing. That's very hard to replicate on a digital itinerary, even though we've made a decent fist of that.
Excellent. No, that sounds very encouraging. I'm conscious of time. I know I want to leave a bit of time at the end there to answer some questions that are coming from the audience. So I'm going to throw the next question over to you, Dr. Tariq, in terms of, how can IPAs continue to attract companies? I know this is a very broad, open question here, and I think it kind of we've covered quite a bit of that throughout the last hour or so, but can you kind of give a bit of shed in terms of what does 2021 look like for you guys? What can IPAs do in general?
So I will emphasize the point that's been made by most of my peers here, and that is, I think it's got to be collaborative, and I think we have to be proactive in terms of how it is that we engage with each other. One thing I do want to highlight, and this is important, is that every company today is a technology company. Just many of them haven't realized that that's the reality for them, right? And I think it's as important today to focus on the existing infrastructure and private sector that exists in your country, and how it is that you can help bring them, and to Marina's point, pivot them towards adopting technology. In the process of doing that, you will by default start attracting international technology companies to come in and work with you, and work with those companies to help drive some of that transformation. This is where relationships and partnerships, and I've seen this, you look at benchmarking. Every benchmarking exercise has Ireland in there, has Singapore, has Israel, has different countries that, where when you take what they've done and you localize it for the needs of your country or your city, you're then able to adapt this to what the private sector requires. Now, what 2021 looks like for me is probably, to Ziva's point, we're going to be very busy. We're probably going to remain quite digital in terms of our engagement with folks. I think it's very important that we build those strong relationships with other IPAs, with development agencies, with infrastructure banks, so on and so forth, that are looking to help their respective private sectors grow outside of the country. It's about diversification of your business model and of your revenue stream, right? And what this does is it reestablishes the baseline for how it is that these companies are going to operate, and how it is that they view long-term partnerships with people. I'll end, David, just with one point, and this is a word that's commonly not viewed very positively, but how can various countries exploit what it is that other countries have been able to accomplish well? And I use that word very favorably, because there is no point in countries or cities repeating the mistakes that others have in the context of building out certain sectors. Ireland was very good at when they decided their strategy, we're picking these 5 sectors, this is what we're going for, and they realized that 3 of them worked well, drop the other 2, right? There are lessons learned from how it is that materializes. Same applies to every country that is represented on this panel. So I think, there is this exchange of information, there is this exchange of what went right and what has gone wrong. And we've just got to figure out how it is that we can work with each other and help companies do different things in different jurisdictions.
No, I think you made some really, really good points there, and I couldn't agree more. I think you're absolutely right. Learning from each other is core to how we move forward. George, I'd like to quickly bring you back into the conversation here with a similar question around what your plans are for 2021. I mean, Cyprus, you were talking about how you managed the COVID pandemic so well, but what's it looking like right now? We know the Brexit opportunity. Joe, I know you've got some points there for IDA in terms of what the opportunity is around Brexit. What's 2021 looking like for you in particular? And equally, what advice have you got for IPAs?
As I said earlier, COVID-19 found us, I would say, as a country, in the middle of a process for defining our long-term growth model. So this development with the COVID-19 actually expedite the reforms that have been put into the table. Just to tell you that over the last 2 years, we formed 3 new deputy ministries in our government. So at the same time, we are utilizing the EU funds that are going to be given to each member state. And we look for more sustainability over the next years to come. Now, for 2021, I will agree with the rest. We will continue with digitalizing our activities. Also, I share the view of Joe in regards to shifting from one model that included the site visits into the country and the shaking of hands and the discussion with the regulators that it was the usual close of the deals. Now, although one could say that with the same budget could do so much more in the digital world, it remains to be seen how effective is each and everyone's digital activities. Whether all those webinars remain in the sphere of awareness, or they will be transformed into serious lead generation and get deals in the near future. So I will say that that is going to be the game changer from each one of us. Is not playing with many tools. There are so many tools in the market. We have to be focused and know what we are doing, because it will be result oriented, and at the same time we will be judged based on the results that our actions would bring.
Thank you, George. Some very good points there. We've got about 10 or so minutes left. So I want to ask a question to Steve, and then I'm going to take some questions from those in attendance. So Steve, I guess this is somewhat, we're hearing more and more about this if you pick up the papers and so on, with the trade war and so on. But what is your take on the notion of reshoring, nearshoring, decoupling from China? And does this present huge opportunities for IPAs around the world?
Well, thank you, David. We've definitely seen and heard a lot about this. It certainly has become the flavor of the month, reshoring, nearshoring. Pulling up roots and relocating a corporate facility is complex, it's time consuming, and I think companies that are going to execute that kind of a strategy, they won't benefit really in the short term because of the high costs that are going to be associated with that. I also think that there's a lot to consider. There's labor contracts, particularly if you're looking at countries in Asia, where most manufacturers do insist on multi-year labor contracts. There's always been issues regarding the protection of IP. There's also issues surrounding reshoring equipment and the proprietorship of equipment in foreign countries, departure taxes. There's also extensive reshoring costs. So this has actually been a strategy that is not new. President Obama was a very keen supporter of reshoring. And as we know, President Trump is also a keen supporter of reshoring. We've heard about the possibility of some fiscal incentives being created to help facilitate companies to reshore back to the US. And of course, we know that the Japanese government created quite a substantial fund in the form of grants to help companies reshore. I have not seen a tremendous amount of reshoring. When we look at some of the statistics that I happen to have here with me, in a recent American Chamber of Commerce in Shanghai survey, we note that 70% of companies did not intend to shift production out of China, 14% said that they're going to move to non-US locations, and 3.7% are moving some production out of China to the US. These are modest numbers, I think. You know, when we look at supply chain resiliency, supply chain stress testing, I think that the resiliency of supply chains held up quite favorably over the course of the pandemic thus far. Of course, there were shortages in PPE, in masks, ventilators, but overall, throughout the entire economy, throughout all supply chains, I think that supply chains were quite resilient. Since China ascended to the WTO, I think the country has developed extremely sophisticated ecosystems of suppliers and niche suppliers where companies are quite happy, to be quite honest. I also think that one area that tends to get forgotten to an extent is the purchasing power of the Chinese middle class, which is extraordinary and forecasted to surpass that of the United States over the course of the next 10 to 15 years. So a lot of companies who have set up manufacturing operations or any kind of operations in China have done so also to serve local markets. So I don't really see a large scale wholesale departure from China at all. What I do see perhaps companies like Vietnam benefiting by having a China plus one strategy. I also see perhaps some regionalization where some companies may wish to nearshore. So from a nearshoring perspective in the North American context, we may see the beneficiary of that strategy being Canada, which has a very large production of STEM talent that gets produced on an annual basis. And Mexico benefits from very reasonable labor costs and of course, very close proximity to the US. And I think that we can see similar examples around the world where perhaps nearshoring to Central or Eastern Europe could be an interesting option for Western European companies.
Thank you, Steve. Does anyone else want to add to that? I mean, I think it's a topical discussion, particularly around COVID-19 right now and with the trade war and everything else that's going on, this potential paradigm shift that we're seeing. You know, Steve, I think you made some really good observations there. Does anyone else in the audience want to talk to this and just kind of elaborate further from their perspective?
Yes, I think I would like to bring the African perspective, because I still believe that as we are inching towards a new normal, the quest for resources will still be there. And since Africa has more than 30% of the world's remaining resources, we still will see a significant amount of investment going to Africa. But beyond that, if you look at 2050, Africa will be 1/4 of the world's population. It will be bigger than China. It will be bigger than India. And it's both a challenge and a great opportunity. And so we are seeing quite, especially in Ghana, we're seeing quite a bit of investment, private sector investment in education coming from British universities. And we're seeing some American universities also look at the market. So Africa could, in a sense, also become a real breeding ground for STEM products, just like Canada has. And I think there's a strategic view to that, especially in Ghana, where because of that, we've actually passed a policy that there will be free senior high school education to elevate the levels of education. But to the extent that this continent is going to be 1/4 of the world's population by 2050 and have significant resources, and 60% of the remaining arable land left in the world,
Sure.
definitely would be a good, should I say, opportunity for attracting investments onto the continent. And as I serve on the board of WIPA as the director for Sub-Saharan Africa, this is one of the things that I try to sell to my colleagues in there, that we should have stronger investment facilitation towards looking at these sectors of our economies.
Thank you. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. Steve, I'm going to open this up to, well, I just want to take some questions that have been fed through to us during our discussion. Very quickly, were you going to make a point back to what Yofi was saying there?
Regarding the reshoring.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I also think that, some of the points that I may have neglected to mention are that China and other countries who have taken a large role in manufacturing, for example, and in supply chain, has developed a very high level of expertise in manufacturing that does not exist back in the US anymore. Manufacturing 4.0, and these are areas where we would need to do some significant, investing in skills upgrading. There's also, to Yuppie's point that I did want to mention, there are some resources that are also simply not available. Again, I'm speaking from a North American context. I believe 90% of the world's rare earth mining happens in China. And these are, of course, critical inputs to high-tech manufacturing. And you simply can't just start mining those products on a whim, because of COVID. So a couple of other
that's good
to keep in mind.
Thank you, Steve. No, I think those are good points. And I think it's a good time now, right? Just take some questions that have been fed in. The first question here I've got up on the board is, which sources of information do you use to identify growth industries and companies? I think we touched upon this very briefly earlier. Who would like to take that question? Rather than me kind of directed at someone. Marina, you want to take that question?
If you ask me the previous question, I would answer the same. I want to say now that like our job is to search where is the money. So we are searching for money. It's not depending on the industry, not depending on whatever resources, no resources. Like we are searching where is the money, and like we are taking into consideration those who are now like investing, those signals of investors, like what's happening there or there, like someone localizing there. Okay, I can offer him to localize here, or like to deep in their like value chains, something like this, or offer like something else, like extras, open an R&D center here, like this. So where is the money? What's generating the extras?
But which sources are you using to identify where that money is?
All the sources. The sources are the same. It's like people talk. It's like magazines, the news, internet, the same forums. Everything's the same. We are just like watching where's the money going, and of course reading the reports that the international economic institutions are doing, like the World Economic Forum, like World Bank, OECD, and of course the leading consulting agencies. We are just following those who are like top Forbes list and so on. So we are just watching where's the money. Then from that we are watching who is not, let's say, available. So we have a lot of things to think about, like sanctions or anything like that. But and of course look at the figures, because the figures show that even those like sanctions, no sanctions, top investors are the US and the European Union. To think, let's say, very coldly on what is the essence of the money fluids now, and to follow them like this. Excellent. So I told you this year it was e-commerce. Next year it will be something else, and we are following immediately.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Marina. Does anyone else, Joe, do you want to comment on that one there from an IDA perspective in terms of how you're finding these potential leads?
Yeah, look, and I think we probably do similar to others. I mean, what we do have is a very large global network of staff and offices in the key markets: America, continental Europe, UK, India, China, but we've supplemented that in the last few years with less obvious places, not least, you know, we're now new here in the Middle East, we're in Turkey, we're in South Africa, we're in Brazil and Russia, and actually all of those markets have reported really good wins this year. And I think that's an important one to, as we're looking forward to 2021 and you know, the numbers you reported in the opening there of you know, 40% down and all the rest of it, having people in markets close to investors as close as you can be at the moment is really the way that we go about it, because there's no sort of no compromise for that.
Fantastic. Well, look, I would like to, I'm sure everyone who's joined us on this webinar would like to extend their thanks to everyone on the panel as well. But thank you all for your participation. I appreciate it's a very busy time at the moment. Well, we know it's never been so busy. That's what we heard earlier. Just a few points to recap on collaboration. I think that was a really key message that came across. So thank you for raising that one there. We also heard that, yes, lead generation don't stop, you need to continue, okay? Otherwise pipelines will dry up and you will face a bigger challenge in the years ahead. So I said a big thank you from everybody, from myself to you all. Thank you again for your time.
I would like to thank our panel members for such an exciting and interactive discussion. I know we all are taking back a lot of key points with us. Dear attendees, if you have any questions, please feel free to post your questions on the video wall. We will share with our speakers and they will reply to you directly or through email. If you'd like to connect with our speakers, please move to the home lobby page. You will find the speakers by typing their names under Networking tab on the right hand of your screen. We welcome our audience to interact with each other on our chat wall. Please also do not forget to tag us on our social media handles with the hashtag AIMDigital.